Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating piece of source material that outlines what is, quite literally, a geopolitical masterstroke from the year 628 CE. We're looking at how a man in the Arabian desert dictated 9 letters that, according to the text, effectively mapped out the future of the ancient world. We are, of course, talking about Prophet Muhammad and a diplomatic mission that stretched way, way beyond the borders of Arabia. So, to really wrap our heads around this, we have to appreciate the sheer audacity of this entire operation. You've got to ask yourself, how in the world could a simple, sealed letter trigger the fall of entire empires? The source material details how these messengers traveled thousands of miles, on foot, by camel, across brutal terrain, just to deliver a single invitation to the absolute greatest powers on Earth. It's a story of profound historical consequences, and crazily enough, it all starts with a tiny piece of silver. Just look at the immense contrast we've got here. On one side, you have these 2 massive superpowers, the Byzantine and Sassanid empires. But, they're economically exhausted. They've been completely tearing each other apart for 26 years straight. And on the other side, Medina, a relatively small desert city where a persecuted minority is really just starting to establish itself. Yet, from this tiny little hub, 9 letters are sent outward to the most powerful, untouchable rulers on the planet. It's a real David and Goliath dynamic, but on a global diplomatic scale. Now, according to the source, this mind-blowing global outreach was entirely dependent on timing. It was really only made possible by the Treaty of Hudaybiyah in 628 CE. See, before this treaty, the Muslim community was locked in a brutal struggle for sheer survival against the Quraysh tribe. Every ounce of energy was focused locally. But this treaty, it secured a crucial 10-year window of peace. This sudden stability, combined with the strategic intelligence that the 2 great empires were weakened from their own endless wars, suddenly freed the prophet to look beyond the Arabian Peninsula and take this message to the global stage. But here's the thing. You can't exactly just mail a piece of unsealed parchment to an emperor, right? They'd just laugh it out of the room as a forgery. Global rulers of the time simply wouldn't read unauthenticated documents. So a silver seal was forged. It was engraved with 3 distinct lines reading, Muhammad, Messenger, Allah. And this wasn't just some bureaucratic stamp. The seal acted as an immediate theological declaration of prophethood. Before a king even broke the wax to read the contents, that seal was already announcing exactly who the sender claimed to be.
Moving right into Section 1, 2 Emperors, 2 Destinies.
First up, let's look at the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius. When he received his letter, he didn't just toss it aside. No, he launched a tense, full-on courtroom-style investigation. He demanded to speak to someone from Arabia, and, by a massive historical coincidence, Abu Sufyan happened to be in the city. Now, at the time, Abu Sufyan was actually the prophet's greatest enemy. Heraclius brilliantly positioned Abu Sufyan's men right behind him so they could catch him if he lied, and then proceeded to interrogate him with these incredibly sharp, incisive questions about the prophet's character, his followers, and his core message. The dramatic irony in the source material here is just off the charts. Forced by this intense setup to be completely honest, Abu Sufyan, again, the guy's mortal enemy, had to admit to the prophet's flawless character, stating they actually called him Al-Amin, the trustworthy. Hearing this powerful testimony, Heraclius intellectually recognized the truth of the message right then and there. He remarkably stated that if these words were true, this man from the desert would one day rule the very ground under the emperor's feet.
And this brilliantly illustrates a stark contrast in leadership. Heraclius actually investigated the claim. And even though he ultimately chose his political throne over his personal faith just to appease his angry clergy, he respectfully preserved that letter in a container of gold. But then, we have the Persian emperor, Khosrow II. Oh man. When his letter was read, he noticed the prophet's name was placed before his own. To him, that was a massive insult to Persian court protocol. He flew into an absolute rage, tore the letter to pieces, and dismissed the messenger entirely without a second thought. Total arrogance.
The source notes that when Prophet Muhammad heard exactly how the Persian emperor had reacted, how he had physically torn the letter, he delivered this very precise 5-word prophecy. Allah will tear his kingdom to pieces. It wasn't framed as a hope or, a wish. It was laid out as a definitive outcome, foreshadowing a massive historical payoff that was going to unfold very, very shortly. Let's head to Section 2, the diplomat and the ally. Here we get another really fascinating comparison. On one side, you have the Negus of Abyssinia, who the text describes as a deeply righteous ally. He'd previously protected Muslim refugees, wept when he heard the Quran, and received a very warm personal letter. He accepted the faith deeply and privately. In fact, upon his death, the prophet even performed a funeral prayer for him from afar. On the flip side is the Makakis of Egypt. This guy acted as the ultimate political pragmatist. He read the letter, asked very respectful questions, and politely declined the religion. But he sent back these generous gifts: honey, fine garments, even a famous white mule. He engaged politically, but kept his personal distance. The text then shifts to the borders of Arabia, outlining a huge spectrum of human reactions. In Yemen, the Persian governor literally converted the moment he heard Khosrow was dead, realizing the prophecy had been fulfilled. Over in Bahrain and Oman, the rulers peacefully brought their entire regions into the fold. But look at that final point, the Ghassanid kingdom. Their governor violently murdered the messenger carrying the letter. The text makes it absolutely crystal clear here. Peaceful invitation was always the standard. Military conflict during this phase only kicked off as a direct, necessary response to the brutal murder of a diplomat. All right, fast forward a bit. Section 3, the 20-year aftermath. Seriously, just take a look at the data we've got here. It visually summarizes a truly breathtaking historical aftermath. In just 2 decades, the geopolitical map completely flipped. The Persian Empire, the massive superpower whose ruler tore the letter, completely collapsed. Khosrow was actually murdered by his own son that exact same year. The Byzantine Empire, which respected the letter but rejected the faith, survived, sure, but it was severely crippled and stripped of its wealthiest territories. Egypt, which was highly diplomatic and respectful, transitioned incredibly peacefully into a major Islamic center. And Abyssinia, the kingdom that offered protection and private acceptance, they remained completely independent and untouched. It's astonishing. Their initial individual responses effectively dictated their entire civilizational fate.
Which brings us to our final section, Lessons in Sincere Invitation.
The narrative emphasizes some pretty massive takeaways from all these ancient encounters. First off, outreach requires intelligent, highly tailored, and peaceful diplomacy. And as we saw with Abu Sufyan, your own flawless character is literally your strongest argument for the truth. An enemy's testimony is incredibly powerful. It also highlights a deep psychological truth. Intellectual agreement, exactly like Heraclius had, is simply not the same thing as making a personal commitment. And ultimately, it reminds us that massive, world-altering shifts can be sparked by the absolute smallest of actions. I mean, we're talking about a few men carrying sealed scrolls on foot across a harsh desert. The source leaves us with this brilliantly provocative final thought, pulling this ancient history right into our modern lives. While you might not be traversing a desert to hand a silver-stamped scroll to an ancient emperor, your daily actions, your integrity, your character, they act as your own personal seal to the world. So, as you go about your life today, ask yourself, what message is your seal broadcasting to the people around you?